Christmas time is here. Happiness and cheer. Play these songs a single time and then never again for the rest of the year. That's right, folks. Today we're talking about Christmas music. Whether it's your most favorite kind of music to play or your least or somewhere in the middle, today I'm going to make sure that you learn what you need to nail these Christmas songs from the worship keys position. Let's check it out. All right, guys, welcome to today's video. My name is David from SundaySounds.com. Now, Christmas hats aside, all jokes aside, our purpose at Sunday Sounds is to help you better your worship keys rig, whether you're using MainStage or Ableton Live. We want to set you on the path for success and give you the tools, information, and resources you need to become a better worship keys player. Now, for today's video, we're going to be talking, obviously, about Christmas music, and this is the mountain that all of us church musicians have to climb every October, November, December, because this is sort of a weird time to be a part of a worship band. There's a pretty solid feel, I think, the rest of the year for the genre or feel that any particular church's worship band sort of sits in. But then we get to Christmas time and we're asked to do all sorts of different things, genre-bending things, Christmas play type things, orchestral, dramatic, theatrical things. And because guitars are kind of guitars and drums are kind of drums and vocalists are kind of vocalists, oftentimes the keys players get asked to step into the gap and fill out all of those different types of things. So as keys players during Christmas time, we can be asked to do all sorts of really unique things. So today, I'm going to be talking about a few of the different vibes or feels that you can expect. There's a pretty good chance you're going to be asked to sit in as the worship keys player on your team. Now, take this with a grain of salt because every team is different, every band is different, and every song can be done a number of different ways. So these are suggestions or points of inspiration. This video is not prescriptive saying you must do it exactly this way. So we're going to start off, I'm going to talk about 4 different distinct feels that I think we can put a lot of different Christmas songs or Christmas vibes into. But before we talk about those 4 categories of sounds, I think it's really important that we identify the most important thing about playing Christmas music in general. Now, obviously, if we're playing in a church context, the main purpose is ministry, right? We want to encourage people using Christmas music to talk about the birth of Christ and what that means for all of us as Christians. But when it comes to the musical side of things, that's what I'm talking about here, because Christmas music, especially here in America, but I would imagine other places around the world as well, is all about that feeling of nostalgia, that feeling of familiarity. So when it comes time for worship bands to do Christmas music, oftentimes it's a balance between familiar modern worship ideas and familiar Christmas music ideas, sounds, themes, motifs, everything like that. So let's get into it. I'm going to talk about 4 kind of themes and the sounds that you might use to get into that sort of feel. Let's start off by talking about the dramatic Christmas song. So the dramatic Christmas song, think big old choirs, Handel's Messiah, huge orchestras, lots of brass, lots of orchestral elements. This can be the hardest space for a lot of us worship keys players to fill because we really don't do this the rest of the year. So I just played a little bit of a Christmas song with a layered patch that I put together in MainStage. This is actually one of the layered patches included in MainStage Christmas Patches Volume 1. And I should say now that all the sounds that I'm going to use to demonstrate these different feels are available in our 2 volumes of MainStage Christmas Patches. So if you want to learn more about those, there's a link in the description. But I'll also say don't feel like you have to rush out and purchase those or check those out. Even if you just take notes on the different types of sounds that I'm using in this video, then you can get into whatever software you're using, if it's MainStage, Ableton Live, even a hardware controller. You're going to be able to pull out actionable types of sounds to look for yourself if you don't want to pick up these sort of done for you libraries of Christmas sounds. So in this patch, I've got several elements. There is a French horn here, which sounds like this. It's a nice crescendo. It's got a tack on it. There is a Christmas choir, sort of in the background with a lot of reverb, sort of a more choral feel here. Then there's this patch we have called Street Band. just sort of filtered down here. And this has several different brass and orchestral elements all layered together to create sort of a pad. And then lastly, there's this sort of old school organ patch called Twilight Organ. It has this really cool initial attack of bells, and then a very dramatic swell in of this super grainy sort of organ sound. So all of these sounds on their own are already pretty dramatic and big, but when you bring them all in together, that's when it really evokes this big culmination, this huge moment sort of feel. So that's one example of the dramatic kind of keys part, the role that you might be asked to play in your band. Let me show you another patch. This is a similar sort of vibe. It has a pump organ, a cathedral organ, and again, that street band kind of patch. This is what that sounds like. So again, I'll highlight a couple of these elements on their own. Here's this cathedral organ. This is like a pipe organ sound, and then there's a good bit of modulated reverb on it if you want to build this for yourself. And I already showed you that street band patch, so then here's the pump organ. And that combined with that sort of pipe organ sound is really nice. Definitely that old school sort of mass church organ sound, which is oftentimes a really great fit for big moments, especially of like a Christmas play or something like that. So that's feel number one. The second feel that you might be asked to cover from the keys position is what I'm going to call the traditional or almost medieval kind of feel. Now, rather than just describe it, let me play a little bit of this for you. This is another patch from MainStage Christmas Patches Volume 1. It's called What Child? Okay, so this is sort of a simple, quiet, almost like a 90s, like post-music-y vibe. Very new wave, very new agey, but this showed up and got really popular sort of as the revitalization of Christmas music happened kind of in the late 80s and the 90s. So you heard a lot of these sounds, and they've become very familiar to folks when they think about sort of classic radio Christmas music. So let me highlight the individual sounds that make up this patch. First off, we have this village whistler. So any sort of like flute or whistle sound that you'd find in the sampler of your choice, if that's EXS-24, if that's Omnisphere, you just want a little bit of vibrato. And then I've added a good bit of reverb to this as well, which really makes it sort of sing and stand out as the most characterful part of the patch. Next, we have a strings patch. This is sort of muted a little bit down in the tone with some EQ to take out the highs. It's sort of serving as a bed underneath. Next up, we have this really nice angel harp patch. Again, in the sampler of your choice, you could approximate this by pulling up a harp patch, and then we've done some really cool programming with the delay repeats. To give it a really cool sort of back and forth, almost arpeggiated vibe that's really, really nice. And then lastly, we have a French horn. That same sort of crescendo that you heard a second ago, but in this patch, it feels totally different. So next, let me give you one more example of the sort of traditional space. This is another layer patch from Volume 1 of MainStage Christmas Patches called Holy Night. This is a really interesting patch to me because it sounds like one of those little wind-up snow globes that you get when you were a kid. You'd sit on the mantle, you twist the thing, and then it would play back sort of a Christmas sound in this really sort of detuned sort of way that was sort of comforting and sort of stressful at the same time. But let me show you the different sounds in here. This first layer is called struck piano. This is actually a world sound. I believe it is a Chinese zither. So you can look that up in the sampler of your choice. But it's functionally being played as a piano here. But it's got attack. That's the main idea. Even if you can't find a sound just like this one, or if you need something a little bit more simple or vanilla, you could just use a regular old piano sound if you wanted to. Next, we've got this pump organ. Again, super muted, nice and static, kind of functioning as a pad. And then this glimmer celeste patch I really love. Again, you can look up a celeste sound in the sampler of your choice. And then there's a good bit of reverb and some pitch modulation on here. It's the pitch modulation that really does it for me here in this sound. Because it gives it that sort of Christmas toy or Christmas sound to me, just that little bit of pitch vibrato. And then lastly, we've got a really cool sound called broken gliss. This is a heavily processed dulcimer sound with a bunch of delay. It's spaced out with reverb to sound super far back into the mix, and it has sort of this bloom that's really nice. These sounds all work together really, really well to give you this sort of delicate, sort of familiar Christmas sound as well. Okay, so let's talk about the next feel or genre you might be asked to help your band pull off from the keys position. Now, I would call this sort of feel the electronic feel, but we can be really honest about where this came from. Pretty much one band, Mannheim Steamroller, sort of created an entire genre of programmed electronic Christian music back in the day, and these songs are still all over Christmas radio for 2-3 months out of the year. So let's start off by just talking about how you can sort of approximate the original sort of sound of like a Mannheim Steamroller or maybe a Trans-Siberian Orchestra kind of Christmas feel. So I have a patch here from MainStage Christmas Patches Volume 1 that is called Steam Engine. It sounds like this. All right, so let me break down the elements of this layered patch. One of the characteristic things I would say about Mannheim Steamroller Christmas music is a lot of it was really programmed, right? Old school MIDI programming and sequencers, and it was played back super, 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 super quantized, right? Everything is like a machine gun in its precision. It's just bam, 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 bam. Everything's right on the downbeat. All of the subdivision is perfect. It's sort of robotic. And that's really kind of the key of the feel, right? Is that it's perfect. So when you're going to try and approximate that sort of sound, if you're using arpeggiators or programming sequences or whatnot, you want to make sure there's not any swing in your programming and that it's snapped to the beat or the metronome or the click or whatever you're playing to. So with that being said, I've got a few different layers here. Got this steamroller sound, which has an arp bass. And then there's a second arpeggiator layer in there. And then there's also this bell part available on the right hand, which is a very classic sort of Juno or Jupiter 80s style bell synth. So you're definitely going to have presets in your sound library in MainStage or Ableton or Omnisphere that can get you in that sort of ballpark, or you can grab this patch from MainStage Christmas Patches if you'd like. But the key is we've got several different layers here. All the arpeggiators are super tight, lots of attack, not a lot of release time. So then the second one is another bell layer. This just sort of stacks on top of the bell from the Steamroller components. And then lastly, we have this angel harp with that big amount of delay that gives it a really interesting vibe. So when we bring all of these things together, to me, that's very reminiscent of this kind of Christmas song. Okay, so let me give you another example of this sort of classic electronic Christmas song vibe. This patch is called Spectacular Sight. Let me show you what it sounds like, and then I'll break down a couple of the components in case you want to try and build something like this yourself. Okay, so this patch is one of the layered patches in Volume 2 of MainStage Christmas patches, and you've got 4 distinct layers here. First off, we have what's called the thinnest lead, which is a nice, bright sort of saw lead. The mod wheel brings up the filter, and it is thin. There's not a lot of low end there, which leaves lots of space for the other layers. The second layer is called Golden Bells. This spans the full range of the keyboard in this patch. It's a really nice sort of classic poly bell sound, sort of an FM bell. So if you got MainStage or Omnisphere, you could search for FM bells and find some pretty good approximations of that kind of sound. We've added a bunch of reverb and some really specific EQ. When you're working with these sort of synth bell sounds, you don't want that much frequency modulation, or it can get super dissonant in a full band mix. So we've used EQ to kind of dial that back and make it sit right in the mix. And then next is this really cool patch called Simple Scene. It's a nice poly synth with a good bit of attack, a good bit of unison. There's a really nice fade to that filter over time, with that resonant filter slowly closing. It works really nicely with these other layers. Without taking over, it definitely contributes some initial energy. And then lastly, we have this really, really cool ARP called the O Twinkle ARP. We've got chord trigger on here to give it sort of a sequence feel, and there's an arpeggiator that's playing octaves above on top. And we've also added in a dotted eighth note delay, which gives the repeats all of that extra energy and character as they sort of pan back and forth in the stereo fields. So I love this sort of thing. And if you want to evoke like a Christmas bells feel, search for a glockenspiel in the sampler of your choice, and then add some delay, add some EQ to take out all the low end, and then throwing an arpeggiator on it like this can give you a really cool vibe. So here it is again with all the layers in. All right, the last sort of electronic one I will show you is sort of a transitional piece between the more traditional programmed electronic sound of like Mannheim, Steamroller, or other bands of that era, and something a little bit more modern. Specifically, we've got some fun Christmas music that's been released over the last 10 years or so by worship bands like David Crowder Band, or then later on just Crowder, who use really pretty modern sort of biting synth sounds with some old school flavors in there as well. So this patch has a bell sound, has a really cool Hammond B3 organ, and then a really aggressive saw sound. So there's 4 layers to this sound. The first is called the Christmas synth. This is a really aggressive mono synth, big super saw, and the mod wheel controls the attack or the brightness. And then I'm able to layer this bell sound on top. Next, I've got this joyful organ. I'm using the vintage B3 organ plugin inside of MainStage to achieve this. I've got several of the drawbars fully maxed out, really fast rotor speed, and then a bunch of click on the keys, which you can hear. Really fun sound. Keep in mind when you're doing a really aggressive organ sound like this, you've got to make sure it's EQ'd for the room that you're in and that you're not pushing the volume too far because the sound can be super piercing. Okay, and then lastly, just a simple bright pad, which is actually pulled out from sampled brass section. So you could look for brass sounds inside the sampler of your choice, then process them with some reverb, a little bit of delay, and a good amount of EQ to dial it in just right to sit as a pad. So all of these layers together give us something that feels kind of familiar, very Christmassy. All right, let's talk about the fourth and final feel that I think you're going to be asked to fit into as the worship keys player on your team. And actually, with a lot of Christmas music I hear coming out these days, this is the most common sort of space I think you're going to need to know how to fill to be able to pull off Christmas music as the keys player on your worship team. I'm going to call this sort of the modern or the hybrid kind of keys sound. This takes old school ideas, really familiar sounds, and mixes them in with really modern, or what I would say are sort of normal modern worship keys sounds like arpeggiators, pads, really nice pianos. And those two ideas sort of merging together really does ride the line between this is a modern worship song and this is a modern take on a Christmas song. So I've got a few examples. I'll show you 3 patches here. All of these are from MainStage Christmas Patches, Volume 1 or Volume 2. This first one is called Anticipated King. All right, so let's break down this patch really quickly. First off, we've got a layer across the whole keyboard. It's called Quiet Stable. This is a physically modeled synthesizer patch that we put together inside of MainStage's Sculpture plugin. Sort of functions as like the piano sound. Then there's also this really cool pad that just carries on. A sort of an organ feel as well. Next, we've got this really cool ARP called Chipmunk ARP, which you can hear right there doing this sort of glissando thing, which is really nice. And then next is this angelic pad. Now I'll break down this pad for a second. It's a really nice sort of choral pad sound, the good bit of shimmer. But then one of the oscillators is also tuned up a fifth, which gives you this really sort of cool new age sort of vibe to the pad. And just the right amount of dissonance as some of those chords are held out, which is really, really cool. Next, we've got another classic synth bell sound called Golden Bells. And then the last layer is, again, that sort of glockenspiel bell called O Twinkle Arp. Which I just absolutely love. So you bring all of these layers in together and you get something that sounds really familiar. Instantly sort of Christmassy, but could also fit really in any modern worship song if you needed it to. Next, let's do something a little bit more reflective, but still super modern. This is a patch from Volume 2 of MainStage Christmas Patches called Softly Falling. So let me break this down for you. First, we have this Field of Angels sound. This is another physical modeled patch. So if you're in MainStage, you can get something like this inside of Sculpture. Go somewhere between glass and wood if you're comfortable with digging into a physically modeling synthesizer plugin. And then there's a good bit of sustain. Again, this is sort of functioning as a piano, but it definitely doesn't sound like a piano. It just sort of fills that same space. Next, we have this Quiet Stable. Has a good bit more attack. Another physical modeling patch. And those two together sound really cool. Next, we have a lead. This one is just giving me initial attack. We've programmed it to have the sustain turned off using the on-screen modifiers in Sunday keys. But combined with these two, it just adds a little bit of extra brightness to the initial attack. And then lastly, this really, really nice ambient arpeggiated patch called Snowflake Arp. There's tons of delay, tons of oozy reverb on this. And it's really functioning as the pad of the sound. Got a really cool reverse effect applied to sampled bells with a bunch of extra reverb and delay on top. So you bring all these layers together. Again, this could go underneath any worship song. It could go underneath Oceans if you wanted it to. And if you needed it to sound even more familiar, you could add in a piano sound as well. But that it can also cover any Christmas song. Okay guys, last one here is a really, really modern sort of keys sound. This is a patch called Sweetly Singing. There's some arpeggiated elements in here, and there's a good bit of a shimmer feel as well. So it makes perfect sense for a Christmas song, but it could also, again, be used for any modern worship song as well. Really quickly break down the elements of this patch. So we've got this angelic pad again. Really cool shimmer pad. Here's a nice bell patch. This is a really classic sort of late 80s, early 90s sort of bell sound. And then lastly, we have this sleigh ride arp. So again, a lot of these are classic sort of vintage synthesizer patches or sounds, and that's where a lot of this popular Christmas music initially went to in the first digital synthesizers, the last era of the original analog synthesizers. These are the patches and the instruments that were used to compose a lot of the first of what we'd consider the modern era of radio Christmas music. So spend some time getting comfortable with some of the stock presets and some of those really cool digital, first generation digital synthesizers. A lot of those sounds are actually what's associated with modern radio Christmas music. All right, folks, so I hope that this video put you in the Christmas spirit, or at least if you're dreading playing Christmas songs at church, maybe this video gave you a few ideas so you can have a little bit more fun, maybe feel a little bit more prepared. Now, if you need something done for you that's gonna give you all the types of sounds and feels that I demonstrated in this video, then you guessed it, there's a link in the description to MainStage Christmas Patches Volumes 1 and 2. Again, it's a done-for-you solution that's gonna get you quick results. If you want to do this yourself, you can totally do so. Just go back and watch this video and then search for some of the key terms and sounds that I mentioned inside the DAW or sampler of your choice. Leave a comment below on this video with your tips for nailing Christmas music, or maybe a horror story about when a Christmas song didn't exactly land with your congregation. Lastly, if you're a worship keys player, especially if you don't like Christmas music, because this is the only Christmas video we're probably going to do for the whole year, be sure to subscribe to the channel, give this video a thumbs up. That support goes a long way, and we really appreciate all of you for being here. Okay, I'm going to take off this Santa hat now. So that's it for this video. Thanks for watching. Have a great day.